Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. I'm your host, Parker Said a Case, and this is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. This episode is very, very special. We're going to be talking about deepfakes and an epistemic apocalypse that could be coming. Whether or not we should be worried that deepfakes will destroy our epistemology, destroy our knowledge. Can we ever know anything again with these deepfakes? We've all seen the Tom Cruise one, so will that become our whole life? That's what we're going to be talking about today. I have with me Joshua Habgood-Coote, and he is a research fellow at the University of Leeds. He's an epistemologist, and I would call him a techno-philosopher. I'll see if he likes that term or not. But I'm really excited to be doing some deep epistemology on a very, very relevant topic. This is like everything that I strive for. Really, really cool stuff. So make sure you watch the whole video so you can become an expert on deepfakes and epistemology and whether or not you should be worried and how worried you should be about deepfake technology. Before we jump in, I want to thank everyone who's making this podcast happen over on Patreon and YouTube members. If you guys like this show, then the best way to support it would be to become a patron or a YouTube member. There are different levels that you can support at with different things that you get at each level. I always forget what to call those. Perks, benefits, whatever. So yeah, if you guys like this, if you want to see me continue to bring experts on to share and school us on their work, if you want to see me be able to feed my dogs and keep the lights on around here, please consider becoming a Patreon patron or a YouTube member. You can find the links in the description wherever you're getting this podcast at. There's also a bunch of merch. You can find us on Facebook at Parker's Pensées Penseurs. There's a whole lot. I could spend the rest of the time just commodifying myself, but I better not. Let's bring in Josh and let's talk about deepfakes and the epistemic apocalypse. Josh, thanks so much for coming on. This is awesome. I'm so excited to talk with you. As we get in, I thought it'd be kind of fun to introduce you to my audience. You, in your paper and in the video you sent me, describe yourself as an epistemologist. Did you do your doctoral work on epistemology?
Yeah, a slightly different bit of epistemology. So I my PhD at the University of St Andrews and the University of Stirling. It's a confusing double program. And then I was working on practical knowledge. So what it is to know how to do something, whether that's a kind of theoretical knowledge or some other kind of knowledge. I then kind of taken a meandering route through thinking about collective inquiry and inquiry in general before thinking about the ways in which technological systems are connected to our collective inquiry. And I guess that's the bit of my research that this paper is a part of.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I don't know if you guys probably call them a thesis over there, but your dissertation.
Yeah.
What was the topic of that?
Yeah, so it was on practical knowledge. So it was about what it is to know how to do something. And I kind of argued so there's two kinds of views in that debate. There's an intellectualist view that says that knowing how to do something is having some normal theoretical knowledge about the question of how to do it.
Yeah.
And then there's a anti-intellectualist view that knowing how to do something is some kind of ability to do that thing.
Yeah.
So I argue for a kind of compromise position where knowing how to do something is an ability, and it also relates to the question of how to do something, but it's an ability to generate answers to the question of how to do something on the fly as you're doing something.
Oh, that's so cool. You have to come back on and talk to me about that because that stuff's so fun. I've been thinking a lot about concepts and whether or not you know-how knowledge is what I call it, whatever. But yeah, whether or not a concept is generated or needs to be there in order to. So I like the intersection of that, and I don't want to be an intellectualist because I think it seems a little bit naive. It seems like a little bit old schooly. But I know there's probably some really good intellectualists out there. So the way you set it up sounds awesome. You got the two sides and you find the middle, and that sounds really cool.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of connections to philosophy of technology as well, right? So the interesting bits of human practical knowledge that are involved and necessary for technological systems to keep going. Some really interesting stuff about the ethics of work and the idea that the use of technology at work de-skills people and leads to situations where people are kind of forced or put in situations where they can't develop practical knowledge. Yeah, so I've been thinking a bit about that and the connections between that and like platform work of the kind that like is hidden behind content moderation and like Amazon Mechanical Turk.
Oh, so good. Yeah. Mechanical Turk stuff so fascinating. I wonder
Yeah.
about it's so crazy to think the mechanical Turk program is like a bunch of humans and they're like outmoding themselves. Like
Yeah.
it's really, really like this hive mind type thing is like making itself not useful
Obsolete.
anymore. Yeah, obsolete. Yeah, obsoleting itself.
Yeah,
I
unless
also
that
think
sound like scary,
yeah,
or kind of like overblown. Like it's been interesting to like watch recaptures, right? Those little tests you have to do, the like, am I a human test?
yeah,
Because a lot of that data isn't just used to like verify whether people are human. It's also then used as like training data
right.
for machine learning systems.
Yeah.
And you might have noticed that the questions have got harder and harder over time.
Mm-hmm.
And in part, that's because like the data that's generated by recaptures, like in the 2000s or 2010s, has been fed into machine learning systems. So machine learning systems can pass the like simpler versions of the kind of Turing test that was going on there. So you have to kind of come up with harder ones where you're like telling apart different kinds of animals or something.
Yeah. It's so crazy because now once I've read a little bit on computer vision, I'm like, oh, okay, so I see that I'm part of this giant experiment, but I also want to get onto this website. So dang it, and you like click the button, anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's an interesting moment of like, and I think this is kind of underdone, like an interesting moment of like labor solidarity between people who are annoyed at recaptures and the folk sometimes in the US, sometimes in like South Asia, in like East Asia, who are working in call centers doing platform work, who are doing some stuff that's like equivalent to those tests all day long.
Yeah.
And like that's the character of their working lives. So I think like the feeling of annoyance that recaptures like is a kind of route into solidarity with platform workers.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's cool. Well, that know-how stuff is so fascinating too when it comes to thinking about at least how people speak of like a chess robot, a chess algorithm, and it's like it obviously knows how to play chess. And here, at least in the States, a lot of the AI theorists inherited the great American philosophy of pragmatism, unfortunately. And they're like, look, if it can make the move, then it knows how to do it. And you're like, well, why is that the condition for knowledge? But is it? And so all that to say, I'm really fascinated by your work there. So you got to come back on and talk about that.
Great. That'd be great. I like there's loads of interesting stuff to chat.
So good.
Yeah.
Well, so I already told the audience that we're going to be talking about deepfakes, and I actually think this is really, really fascinating. Just a brief note, real quick, that I think this is the type of public-facing philosophy that is done really well. I see a lot of my friends, and I love them, but a lot of my philosopher friends are saying, I want a public-facing philosophy, and they take their philosophy that is that the public is not very interested in, and they try to just shoehorn that in. How can I make it more understandable? And it's like, well, you can make it more understandable by touching on something that the public already is really fascinated by and showing how your work connects to that. And I think this is right in the sweet spot. Deep fakes are all over the place, and it's like, well, hey, do you want to talk about epistemology? No. Do you want to talk about how you can know whether or not that's Tom Cruise? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, here we go. And now we're in deep, and now they're fascinated. So they'll put up with the terminology because their interest is piqued.
Yeah, totally. And I think I've been doing like some kind of public philosophy stuff like since I guess about 2016, 2017. And one thing I've kind of learned in that is that like the setup of questions at the beginning of bits of public philosophy is really, really, really important. So like it's really tempting for everyone to start being like, this is my research. I need to explain and argue why that's like relevant or important. And like sometimes that's good and you see cool stuff, but like it's in a way easier if you get places where people already have questions and like worries that are philosophical worries or like can be reframed as or touch on philosophical worries, and then like give them tools to think about those things. I think that's like both more effective and like less like let me come from the ivory tower with these like, interesting like concepts. Is more like the stuff I can like chat to my pals about when we're like out running and
Yes.
not feel like I'm going into like a lecturing mode.
So good. I love that. For me, it always happens after jujitsu class, where people are like, so what are you working on? And I'll tell them something goofy, and they'll be like, that's pretty fascinating. And so a perfect one I think for this conversation would be, how do recordings give us knowledge? How do photos,
Yeah,
drawings,
yeah.
paintings give us knowledge? Like, I think each one of those is a little bit different. You look at a painting of my grandmother, and I'm like, did my grandmother have blonde hair? She in the painting she does, and that might give me different knowledge than a drawing of her or a photo of her or a recording of her. So yeah, how do we gain knowledge from these types of things? I don't are they artifacts? I'm not even really sure how to categorize all of these.
Yeah, I guess insofar as drawings and paintings and photographs and videos are all objects designed with a kind of function
Hmm.
to represent some bit of the world, they're kind of, and they're like the products of human skill,
Yeah.
then yeah, we can think about them all as different kinds of artifacts.
Okay.
Yeah, so we should like step back a second to see why people interested in deepfakes have been so worried about the like epistemology of drawings and photographs.
Yeah.
So there's an idea that video evidence and kind of more generally evidence from recordings is kind of special. So when you see a recording, if folk are watching on like YouTube or listening to this podcast, like they're listening to or watching a recording, and there's a kind of directness to that kind of evidence. So if you like see a photograph, some people have thought that you can like literally see the objects represented in the photograph. It's not that you're looking at like a photograph, say, of your
Yeah.
grandmother, but you're looking at your grandmother. So recordings are kind of special, and that specialness is to be distinguished from like the relative less specialness of like hand-drawn pictures, or like if you think about like a cartoon that's been made by like people drawing like frame on frame. And there's some kind of diagnostics of these differences, right? So if you look at a drawing of your grandmother, the person drawing might have like wanted to make her look more beautiful, or to like change the color of her hair, or might have been malicious and made her like a what do you do, like those cartoonists you see in like public squares in Europe,
Caricature. Yeah.
caricaturists. Yeah. So they can introduce details that aren't there, and like all of the details in the drawing are things which like the drawer better have had like knowledge of at some point, because they've reproduced them. And that's very different from a photograph, right? So supposedly it's not possible, or at least difficult, to introduce details into a photograph just because you want to represent them. And a photographer can discover things in her photograph, right? So if like a cat has come in and photobombed the photograph, she might not have noticed that until she gets the negatives developed eventually. So recordings are special, drawings and like cartoons are like less special. How's that kind of to be made sense of in terms of like different sources of knowledge? Well, a lot of people have thought, following Dan Kevin and Taylor, that we should think that the knowledge we get from recordings is a kind of perceptual knowledge. We're like literally seeing the objects represented, whereas knowledge from like drawings broadly, it should be thought of as a kind of knowledge from testimony, where we have to rely on the person who's produced the drawing and on their beliefs about what's in the drawing, right? It's more like someone telling you something than like seeing the thing with your own eyes.
Man, that's really fascinating for thinking about the different art forms of photography versus drawing. And that might even be like a way to parse those, or might, raise a bunch of hackles in people, because one is more constructive than the other. But depending on the debate, it's like, well, this angle doesn't actually represent this waterfall at all. If you went and looked at the waterfall, you wouldn't see this at all. It's from one limited perspective, and you know then you have to bring in all the different tools, the lenses and all that stuff too. And is that really a construction or not?
Yeah, so there's a really interesting question in the history of photography about how we should think about photography. And there's a kind of like a little bit of a naive history that's like people taking photographs have always wanted to represent the world like better and better and better.
Yeah.
So like think about street photography and like portrait photography, where it's like really trying to capture the nature of the like person or the like objects being represented, and that's got better and better over time as the technology's got better. And it turns out that's just not the right. There's not like it's not a complete history of photography. There's a really interesting kind of like dialectic between at least two styles of photography. One that's really interested in the expressive possibilities of photography, and another that's interested in like it's called like straight photography sometimes. That's really interested in like capturing the reality of photography. So like Dominic Lopez has this really interesting book called The Four Arts of Photography, where he talks about like these different styles of photography being connected to like different views of the kind of like philosophy and aesthetics and the epistemology of photography. And so I think all the way back through the history of photography, you see these kind of two different streams going on. One that's really interested in like how can I use the setup creatively to create things which I couldn't with a brush or with a pencil, and another that's really interested in like, yeah, I've got to make some, and like by like cutting and pasting different parts of a photograph together, and another that's really interested in, I'm not going to interact in the development process at all. This is like minimal hands-on for the person. It's just like pressing a button and then the photograph is taken.
That's so fascinating. When it comes to maybe this is higher level, or it depends on how you think, I guess, deeper in or higher level. When it comes to perceptual knowledge and testimony, I do work in Christian philosophy, so I know like from this side of things, people are always like bolstering testimony because they want to talk about the word of God or the reliability of testimony in the case of Christ and the resurrection. But I'm wondering, in epistemology generally, is perceptual knowledge on better standing than testimonial knowledge, or does it always depend?
So I guess it depends, right? So
Spoken like a true philosopher, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky. So I think sometimes people want to say like perceptual knowledge is better, because you're just relying on yourself and like kind of this kind of thought that's tied into like all epistemology is built as a response to some kind of skeptical argument, and perceptual knowledge is like easier to establish as a source of knowledge and testimony. I'm not kind of sure that that's right, or you need to think that perception and testimony are different. So I guess the way I've thought about it is that the difference is that testimonial knowledge is interpersonal knowledge, in that like the source of your knowledge like really relies on another person. Like you're not just relying on your own capacities, but there's some kind of like interpersonal dependence in that kind of case. Whereas in the case of perceptual knowledge, there's no interpersonal dependence going on. You're just relying on your own capacities. So even if you don't think that like interpersonal knowledge or knowledge that requires dependence on a particular other person is like worse, you might think that there are certain kinds of things which interpersonal sources of knowledge can't do.
Yeah.
And one of those, so Regina Rinne has argued that one thing video evidence does is it provides a backstop to our testimonial practices, because like if there's some question about like which of two people who are in a disagreement is telling the truth, you can go and like look at an evidence from recording, like go and like find a video of the events in question, and that's kind of a final like source of evidence about that question. And it can only play that role if evidence from videos is not itself interpersonal, because then we'd like need some other source of non-interpersonal knowledge to be the kind of like final court of arbitration. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like better or worse. It's just there's a special role played by perceptual knowledge through a recording.
The backstop, is it Rinne? I don't know how to say her last name.
Yeah, Regina Rinne. Yeah,
Rinne. Okay, I never said it out loud before. The backstop understanding does seem like a kind of trump card, right? Where it's like, well, just pull out the video evidence, and if I don't want to jump the gun on deepfakes too much, but if someone had if someone had enhanced the video in order to see it more clearly, does that then move it from perceptual to testimonial?
Yeah, so really difficult set of questions.
Yeah.
So where are we going to draw the line between kind of like pure or like just simple evidence from recordings and like something which has had like some kind of change in it, which might have been initiated by someone thinking that like we need to make a change in order to represent the world better. This is just very difficult to make sense of. So if we come back to the case of, because I know more about photographs than I do about like videos. You might think like, okay, so like maybe digital photography is a bit funky because like you have to set up the like way the program that's processing the information that's coming in from the lens into some kind of digital information and the way it's being represented on the back of the camera and then on it in a JPEG or whatever. Maybe even if you think about like film photography, where you've got like a mechanical sense of light coming in, being caught in the film in the back of the camera, and then that being developed using like chemicals. There's a huge number of choices that are made in how you develop that film. Slight sidebar that like comes back again to the point. It turns out that like from any time before the 1970s, the way that chemicals were used in film developing was set up to, in a way, like preferentially represent people with like lighter skin. So often people with like darker skin would just like not show up on photographs or would show up as like shadows. Also people from like East Asia would show up as like a funky color, like not the color that their skin would appear like in daylight to a human eye. And that was done because the kind of sample cards that were used to set up the film development process only had like white faces on them. And that was the like kind of sample that you would set up as the kind of neutral face to be checked in on. So Lorna Roth has done really excellent work, like uncovering the history of these Shirley cards and the role they played in like making sure that the way film was developed was great for representing people with light skin and worked terribly for people with non-white skin.
I actually missed the name. Who is the academic?
It's Lorna Roth,
who's
I think a journalism professor in somewhere in Canada. So if that's right, and it is like just the history of film photography, then it's really hard to make sense of there being like any kind of just like neutral process which no human has got involved in. And then if you look into like the way digital photography works at the moment, there's all kinds of like funky little bits where a machine learning system is used to kind of fill in or to change a bit of a digital photograph. There's a recent story where I think it was I can't remember what the brand of the phone was, but they advertising themselves as having great like night vision photography. And the idea was you could take like great pictures of the moon, and this was like shown in adverts. And it transpired that what was going on was in every photograph they were like copying and pasting the same stock image of the moon. And it's like, okay, you shouldn't have been advertising it like that, but like also it reveals something about the choices which are made in any kind of recording device. So like we don't need to think that like, so some people do think that there's no such thing as like a kind of pure or neutral setup of a recording technology where no one's like involved in it, but there do seem to be like a whole spectrum of cases where there's like more or less human involvement, and there's not like a clear line between like doctored recordings where someone's maliciously changed something in order to misrepresent reality, and like the kind of pure things where reality is being represented like accurately. And actually there's lots of cases where photographs were changed and doctored in order to represent reality better. So I guess that kind of how it turns up in the taking photographs of the moon case. But in the history of photography, there's all these kind of weird cases where for a while it wasn't possible to take pictures of the sky and a landscape in at the same time. So what people did was they cut and pasted. So they took a photograph of a landscape, the sky would be like whited out, and then they copy and paste often the same sky again and again into the photograph, so you could see the whole of a scene rather than seeing it misrepresented by what was not a great like photographic technology at the time.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So, getting your this may be tricky, but getting your own intuitions, your own ideas here. Do you think that do pictures give us perceptual knowledge?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So let's like take a step back and think about the role this is playing in the initial question. The initial question we were thinking about is like, how worried should we be about deepfakes?
Yeah.
And one thing the philosophers have done is say, yes, we should be worried about deepfakes. We should be worried about them because they're going to transform the kind of knowledge we can get from videos. One way of making sense of that is videos used to provide us with perceptual knowledge, but deepfakes raise this possibility. Maybe the photograph or the video was produced by fancy machine learning technology and someone not wanting to represent the world accurately. And so if that's right, then maybe we always need to trust, when it's a possibility, we always need to trust someone who's showing us a photograph or producing a photograph not to have done that kind of like doctoring.
Yeah.
If that's happened, then videos are no longer going to be a kind of pure perceptual knowledge, but they're going to be a kind of testimonial knowledge. Mm-hmm. So there's two ways out you can take here. So one is to say, yeah, like deepfakes would transform videos from perceptual into testimonial knowledge, but that's not the end of the world. Maybe testimonial knowledge is just like fine.
Yeah.
And like some of the people in literature have done that. My kind of line on this is slightly different. So I don't think it's right to think that video evidence and evidence from recordings is a non-interpersonal form of knowledge. I don't think it's a kind of perceptual knowledge. Mm-hmm. I think what's going on is that recording devices, so like the physical cameras or like the phone or whatever that you're using to take video, that's an artifact. That's an object that's being produced in order to represent the world accurately. And I think the right view about knowledge from artifacts in general, so like not only cameras, but thermometers, watches, all of the things we use to like keep track of the world, is that they involve reliance on a whole group of people. Okay, so you've got to rely on the designer of the thermometer. You've got to rely on the owner to kind of have checked up on it. Maybe have changed the battery if it requires a battery. Yeah. Like the mechanical, whatever, if it needs to go into like be repaired every now and again. And that doesn't feel like there's a kind of relying on one person in that case. And that's because you're not relying on one person. You're relying on a whole social practice around the production, maintenance, and use of different kinds of artifacts to have done their job right. So I think we can just extend that view across to the case of knowledge from video. So when we see some events being represented in a video and then form a belief about what's happened in the place and time being represented, we're not relying on one person, sure, but we're relying on all of the people who were involved in production, processing of the video, its dissemination, to have like lived up to the social norms of that practice. So if that's the view of knowledge from videos, then the fact that like people can misrepresent reality in videos in this particular way by making deepfakes is a worry. If people are doing that, then the norms aren't being lived up to of the relevant social practice. But it's not like a complete disaster. It's not like one type of knowledge has transformed into another. It's that the amount of knowledge produced by the social practice has like gone down. Yeah. In a similar way to if it turned out that like, I don't know, all documentary producers, like video documentaries, had been doing really misleading editing or something like that. And we had a whole scandal about like editing and people in a really misleading way to make it look like they had said stuff they hadn't.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's really helpful. So you're pushing it back to the social norms. And I wonder, are there more reliable, more trustworthy social norms? Do social norms, does the evidence produced by social norms, I guess I'm having a hard time saying or thinking what I'm saying, like, if there's a whole list of social norms, are some more reliable or more trustworthy than others?
Yeah. Right, totally. Definitely yes. And we've got to be like realistic.
Yeah.
So it's tempting to have a kind of like nostalgia for the journalistic practices of, I don't know, the 1990s or 1980s or 1970s.
Right.
That's part of a more general weird thing about our discourse about the media, where it's like, we've entered this new post-truth age, everything's gone terrible, we need to wind things back to the golden age of journalism or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's never been a golden age of journalism. Journalistic
Right.
norms are never perfect. But there's obviously like better and worse norms about like the production and dissemination of photographs and videos. So one of the things I've tried to do in the paper is like look back on some of the interesting bits of history, to kind of pull out some of the places where those norms are being developed, or places where people were like systematically breaking the norms. So one example I got really into is the historian Andy Tucher, who has a really great book called Not Exactly Lying, talks about the use of photographs in the US kind of in the 1890s through to the early 1900s. And it turns out that people were systematically like editing by hand the photographs that were printed in the newspaper.
I couldn't believe that
like,
when I saw your the sources you used, or the examples. I was like blown away. They were taking pictures of an empty place in the city, and then they would doctor in people, or that New York Evening Graphic, which was unreal.
Yeah, so there's loads of different examples, but like this is like to the extent that like if you picked up, so the New York Evening Graphic is like totally like in the UK, like it would be a tabloid. It's like yellow press is not a good newspaper. But like even respectable newspapers, I think there's evidence that like pretty much every single photograph was doctored in those papers, and it wasn't like systematically doctored, so it was like misrepresenting how people looked or what happened,
Right.
but it was just changed to make it like look better, or to like sometimes in order to tell a story, to show something that which you couldn't show because like the photographer had turned up late, or like the story like needed to be produced in a different place.
Yeah. So when I was looking at the examples that you gave in your paper and in the video that you sent me, I couldn't believe the examples. Like they go back way far. They go back into like the turn of the century, and people are there's this thing called the New York Evening Graphic, which would make people called it the evening pornographic, because they would make like salacious pictures, and they would I don't know if it was like pastiche or what they were doing to make those happen, but this is like a long thing that's been going on of doctored and doctoring for bad reasons and for good reasons, it seems like.
Yeah, totally. Right. So there were like these really bad, like, not baggies, but like newspapers that like no one was really trusting. Like no one thought that these composographs were like real. They're obviously not real. They've got like little captions in speech bubbles. But it turns out like even quite reputable newspapers, the people in them were doctoring photographs and doctoring them to like represent reality accurately. So sometimes like a photographer couldn't show up to a fire or something like that. So they'd go and like take a picture of the ruins, and then like something like painting the like fire burning up from the building or whatever. And it's maybe like there's a pretty good case that like every photograph that was printed in a US newspaper around that time was doctored in some way.
Wow.
So the question is like, are there better and worse social practices? This looks like a really bad one. This does not look like well set up practice where you can trust people to be representing reality. Things got better when, as Andy Tucher argues, like the term faking shifted from like a like acceptable technique that photographers and also writers, it turns out written faking was quite common, was used to like a term of criticism, and there was like a social norm against faking. So in a way, I kind of want to take that history and pull that into the present. So to suggest that like deepfakes are a problem, are a thing to be worried about, but they're not like a catastrophe. They're not like a a harbinger of an epistemic apocalypse or an infocalypse or whatever like fancy new term you like. The problem is around like the negotiation and implementation of the social norms around journalistic photography, right? So it's like, here's a thing which like is not going to be useful for us producing knowledge about the world, systematically using deepfakes to represent things that don't happen. How are we going to deal with that like social problem, rather than like, here's this new kind of technology that's going to disrupt our social practices and like lead us into some like dystopian situation.
I love that. I love it. It seems really clear headed, and it kind of rises above. Again, rises above or goes underneath. I'm not sure which way, but it takes a step back from all the mania of the modern tech hysteria or mania. Like it's going back and saying this is still a social problem, so we're going to need to have social solutions, which I want to talk about. Just to close the loop on the distinction between perceptual and testimony knowledge when it comes to photography. You said it's like knowledge from artifacts. Is that a subclass of testimony, or is it a new category in its own right?
Yeah, so details are going to really matter here. So I'm pulling on some work of Sandy Goldberg's.
Awesome! I love Sandy.
Yeah, and his stuff is great. Like often you're like, oh, I've got some tricky problem to think about, and the solution is to go and find a paper of Sandy's where he's like theorized the like more general thing, and that's what I'm kind of doing here. Like Sandy's got a couple of papers picking up on some work of Ernest Sosa, I think, on the difference between knowledge from instruments and knowledge from testimony, and that's kind of meant to be a way of understanding the distinctiveness of knowledge from testimony. And here the thought is like knowledge from artifacts or from instruments involves diffuse social reliance on a whole group of people, whereas knowledge from testimony involves just reliance on one person. But actually, I'm just thinking of other bits of Sandy's work where he's argued that there is also this kind of diffuse social reliance in the way we form knowledge based on other people's beliefs. So he's got a really great paper on reasoning of the form. If that were true, I would have heard about it by now. And his account of that kind of reasoning depends on having a story about like diffuse social reliance on a whole group of people. So like you have to rely on like all of the sources of like information, which might be newspapers, but might not be, they might be your friends or whatever, to give you reliable information in a kind of reasonable time frame about some factual question. So like all of my friends are having babies at the moment, so I might like reason like, well, if like blah had a baby, then I would know about it by now. And when I'm relying on that kind of reasoning, I'm not relying on blah to tell me, or like any of my other friends to tell me when the baby is born, but on kind of all of them, and on us having like a social practice around the like dissemination around the arrival of babies. So the thought is like maybe there's a difference between like simple cases of testimony and like these cases of knowledge from artifacts, but actually there are lots of cases where we do rely on bigger social practices in our kind of like testimonial like reliance as well.
That makes sense, and that brings in like the Facebook algorithm, which prioritizes congratulatory posts. Like they'll push those out if you graduated or if you're having a baby. It's like they're supposed to be pushing those out to people more often, and then that you get back into the instrument stuff too. Our modern times are so goofy, and I guess one of your points is that it's not just our modern times, right? It's always been this kind of stuff. Yeah, that's funny.
So people like really get on. You have one thing to think that like, oh look, internet writing and the ways that we form like knowledge based on like social media posts is really special. And then it turns out if you go into the like 19th and early 20th century, people were sending like one another postcards like 4 times a day. And there was this whole practice around like informal writing of postcards that would be like really quick, have all these like really informal kinds of writing. So the linguist Gretchen McCulloch has all this interesting stuff about like smileys and like different kinds of like contractions and things that people thought were like special about internet writing, like kind of syntactic and like grammar features. It turns out they're like not special features of internet writing, they're special features of informal written communication, and you can
Ah,
find examples in like photographs, and sorry, not photographs, in people sending one another postcards,
yeah.
like 50, 100 years ago.
Wow.
And like similarly, that could be like an interesting model to be thinking about social media on, right? And think about people sending one another postcards 4 or 5 times a day,
Yeah.
where information would get around really quickly in a written form.
Wow. Yeah, that's super cool. Now I'm remembering those tube systems where you put a note in there and you vroom, and then shoot up
Yeah,
to.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, I forgot all
Yeah, we
about
still
this.
had them. Used to work in a supermarket when I was a teenager and in my undergrad, and you still use those systems to get the money around. You'd have
Oh,
like
okay.
pneumatic tubes that would pull when you were kind of cashing up at the end of a shift. You'd take a little plastic tube and you
Yeah,
put all the notes into it, and then it would shoot up and go to the backroom office where
that's
the
super
money would
cool.
be
Yeah,
counted.
I guess they have them at the bank now that I think about it too.
Yeah.
If you're in the drive-through line. Oh, that's cool.
Mm.
Okay, so that's helpful to think about knowledge from instruments and knowledge from artifacts and the distinction between that and perceptual knowledge and testimony. Now, getting into the deepfake apocalypse, there's like 3 claims I think that can represent the epistemic apocalypse that you take on here. That one is that deepfakes have terrible effects on our social epistemic practices. 2, deepfakes are historically unprecedented, which we've already kind of talked about, like not quite.
Mm.
And then 3, the solution to deepfakes are technological. So I would love to spend most of our time in the third one. The solution to deepfakes are technological, but I wonder, deepfakes will have terrible effects on our social epistemic practices. I think your argument is that, like, again, this is a social concern, and so long as our social practices are still reliable, um, it's okay. Or like, can you help me think through that? The solution to that one?
Yeah. So the idea is that like one thing like I like to do when thinking about like something in epistemology that's made its way into like public discourse is
Yeah.
to like go and read a bunch of like op-eds
Okay.
back to back about that same thing. So I did that about like fake news a few years ago, and I've done it for deepfakes. And often people, when they're like articulating the threat of deepfakes, are just employing basic like skeptical arguments. So it's like when deepfakes are around, or maybe even before deepfakes are around, there's like a skeptical possibility, which is
Mhm.
that the video that you're seeing or the recording you're hearing isn't a real recording or a real video, but it's like something that's been produced by a malicious hacker who wants to like deceive you.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, cool. Like we know about skeptical possibilities. They are a general thing. You can raise that kind of possibility for any any knowledge claim at all, right? That's one of
Yeah.
the lessons of your first like epistemology course.
Yeah.
So the threat of deepfakes better not just be a generic skeptical hypothesis. It's got to be something specific. So I think the best version of that comes from Brinny's work, where she's got the story about like the way knowledge from videos can be perceptual knowledge if there aren't deepfakes, and then it transforms into testimonial knowledge, and that's really bad because it removes the epistemic backstop from all our testimonial practices.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to set up an alternative view. I'm not trying to like definitively knock down the view that she and Dan Kevin and Taylor like, but like just set up this alternative view where our knowledge based on recordings is all knowledge from artifacts, which involves diffuse social reliance. And then the idea isn't that like everything is totally fine and we should be okay, but that there's like always been problems in that social practice, like, and we've just got to like have an ongoing practice of negotiating and implementing those norms.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be like the options are be really worried or don't be worried at all. It's like bring the problem into a shape that we can kind of make sense of, into a kind of human and like problem about like social practices. So that's kind of like responding to the first part of the epistemic apocalypse narrative, that deepfakes will have terrible effects on our epistemic practices. And then yeah, some of the examples we've talked about already show us that like faking in photography, also it turns out in videography, is like really not unprecedented. And there's this whole history from the from the invention of photography about different kinds of faked photographs and all these interesting like examples from the history of photography that look really similar to like current concerns around deepfakes.
Yeah.
So like the composer graphs you were talking about earlier in the New York Evening Graphic are often like face swaps and then like super what would have been seen as like sexualized or like pornographic pictures of women.
Mm-hmm.
And like kind of a moral panic might arise about those photographs, and that's kind of similar to some of the concerns that have arisen about deepfake pornography. And that's not to belittle concerns about deepfake pornography. Like, I take it there are serious problems about both the representation of particular people in non-consensual pornography, but also about the kind of like general propagandistic message of those recordings that represent, I think, quite viscerally that particularly women are objects that are completely fungible, like whose faces don't, and individuality doesn't matter. You can switch around the face kind of at will, right? So there's a really pernicious kind of objectification going on there, which is also going on in the composer graphs to a lesser extent. So the point is not to be like not worried, but to pull out the concerns and pull them out from being just about deepfakes to a higher level of generality to about like,
I think that's so, that point is so good, because I can see someone using your work and spinning it and being like, look, see, this is why it's not a problem. But instead it's like, no, this has always been a problem, and that's not like an okay thing. It's like, no, this is a social problem. This is something that we should have been concerned back then, and we should be concerned now. And perhaps since it's a social problem, the solution is a social one. Like this, it's getting more clear. It's getting past like the smokescreen of the newest technology, and so it needs to be a technological solution. And if you don't really know how to code, then you can't be part of the conversation. It's like, not quite, you know.
Yeah, that's right. So just to zoom out in a slightly confusing direction here for a second, that'll hopefully like make sense again.
Sure.
So I think there's a whole lot of ways that technology companies and like critics of technology who are like useful to technology companies have got a grip on like the news agenda and like the discourse around technology in general.
Sure.
Whereas like it used to be like we were all techno-utopians, and like the new iPhone was going to like help you and improve your life in all these kinds of ways. And like that utopianism is like no longer tenable. Like I guess after the tech clash around like 2016 with the like all the stuff about Facebook and private data and a bunch of other things. So now the stories that are being told are like kind of techno-dystopian, but the problems are still problems that can only be solved by the technology companies, right? So you have to be careful to be like, look, there's this problem around like trust, and no one trusts the banks anymore, like post 2008. Okay, cool. How are we going to solve this? Well, look, I've got this really cool technological solution for you. It's called Bitcoin. And there's this distributed ledger, and no one needs to trust anyone anymore. You need to trust the technology, or like us, the technology founders. And we've got this really fancy, like new Bitcoin solution to the social problem of like banking, or more specific problems about getting people in the third world banked, or like all these different kinds of issues. So part of the thing I'm interested in is like digging into what are the questions that are being presented to us as questions that we should be thinking about and questions to be resolved, realizing that like a lot of them are kind of misframed or like useful to technology companies or useful for like people wanting to sell technology products, and then trying to like do a bit of like ideology critique on those questions, pull out and realize that like insofar as there are real problems going on, in lots of these cases they are social problems, right? Like the problem of trust in banking isn't a technological problem, it's a social problem.
You just blew my mind on that one with the Bitcoin example, which is that was so good. I've always been fascinated by Bitcoin because I thought of the tropes discussion in metaphysics, and I'm like, could this actually be like an instantiation of a trope, like, and non-fungibility? And I've always gone that way with the more abstract thinking. I never thought about the social critique or the social solution, that this is like a techno-chauvinist answer to a mistrust in the banks. And surprise, surprise, it came around right after, or came prominence maybe right after the banking collapse. And it's like, wow, that's really cool. That really blew my mind just now.
Yeah, so there's like there's kind of two things. Wow, so really there's kind of, I guess, three things that philosophers might be interested in thinking about Bitcoin. This is not something I thought about very much. Like, so one thing is like, yeah, as you're right saying, like thinking about the metaphysics of Bitcoin. So one of the guys who was a PhD student at the same time as me in St Andrews, Martin Lippmann, has been doing some work in like the metaphysics of Bitcoin. Another is to like think about the politics of Bitcoin, and like whether there's like kind of like hyper libertarian, like individualistic politics which is being proposed. And then there's the thing that I'm interested in, which is what are the questions that are being presented to us as important, and like what kinds of solutions do they push us towards? So I should say here, so I'm really influenced by the data journalist Meredith Broussard, who had this really cool book called Artificial Unintelligence, where she introduces this idea of techno-chauvinism, which she says is the belief that tech is always a solution. And she goes through a bunch of different like examples. So a lot of the book is about like driverless cars, and the idea that like driverless cars are going to be great and amazing and fully autonomous, and they're just coming like in the next like couple of years. And then she goes and like tests them out, and they're all terrifying, so scary, because they do all these weird things. They're like janky and don't do exactly what you'd expect. And then she goes, I mean, this is not so much like how technology looks now, but like in the 2010s, I guess you had this like phase where there was an app for everything. Like part of the kind of ideology of the people who are proposing those kinds of projects is that like all of the social problems that we face, whether that's like finding a partner who you want to have a relationship with, or like getting food delivered to your house, or like finding somewhere to rent, or finding a place to go on holiday, are problems that can be solved by a little app on your phone that you can just press on and it solves your problem. And some of what Broussard is doing is arguing that those technology companies, when they're selling their product, are misconstruing social problems, the problem of finding someone you want to be in a romantic relationship with, as technological problems, like some kind of weird like market-based or like matching problem, which doesn't ultimately resolve the underlying social problem.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I forgot about that phrase. People used to always say, "Oh, there's an app for that," and it was from some company that's put it out there, and then people kept quoting it, and it's like, they won. They just won. You just let them win by quoting that phrase to me 11 times in our conversation. Like, stop doing that. But now it's brought to my head, so now I have to forget that again. But that's really fascinating, because the solution, again, man, this is really opening up stuff in my mind. The solution to your singleness, it's actually it's not a you problem. It's a limitation in how many people you're able to see. So maybe there is one for you out there, but you have limited resources, and that you only bump into so many people. But now we can bring the whole world to you and your phone, and now you'll be able to find that one who's actually compatible with you. Not to say that they don't work. I know plenty of people who have met their significant other on apps, but still they had to negotiate with a human being, a person. It wasn't a perfect match.
Yeah, totally right. So what's the thing that solves your problem? Like, if you like, not to be like super like one partner monogamy is like the solution to everyone, but like if you do want to have one long-term romantic partner, like what's the thing that solves the problem? Well, it's forming a relationship with one person, right? It's not that, then that's when the problem, like insofar as it's a problem, is like solved, right? Where your desire for a partner has been fulfilled. It's not at the moment where like you've matched with someone on like your dating software,
right?
So
I've also heard people give a critique of those and saying that it may be harming long-term relationships in that you have all these options, and you can say, well, maybe I just picked the wrong one, or there's a bunch more that I can go and choose from, so I don't actually need to be with this one. And that it's it's a social problem. It's the same thing as, back when people were in tribes, and it's like, well, I'm the main hunter, so maybe I have more to pick from. It's like, it's the same thing, just in new packaging, and maybe exacerbated because of the technology. Maybe it's just more options for that to be drawn out more.
Yeah, so I taught a course on the social epistemology of the internet. I guess it must have been in 2019. And as part of the course, I got students to like come up with their kind of own projects where they would like apply a bunch of the tools we've been thinking about to like a problem on the internet. If they're really open to them, like do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the groups got really interested in dating apps and the kind of problems of dating apps. And they came up with some pretty good evidence that like there was both like a really dangerous and pernicious kind of marketization of people for relationships on dating apps, and also some really weird ways that like social stereotypes about different groups of people were like put like very much at the front because you've got so little information. Like I'm old, and I've been in the relationship like since before dating apps were a thing, but like I'm reliably informed that like on lots of dating apps, so like often I guess this is more on like gay dating apps, but like because you've got very little information that you put forward, they'll be like, I want like these stereotypes and not these stereotypes, and some of them will be like fatphobic or like racist stereotypes. And so there's a kind of weird way that those features of them, like those bad stereotypes, are pushed to the very front.
Like especially probably the longer you're on the app, and you don't want to waste your time. So you're saying, I've seen it with ladies where they'll say like, if you're under 6 foot, need not apply. They don't use that phrase, but it's like that. It's like, this is exactly what I'm looking for because I'm sick of wasting my time or whatever, and because I know the options are out there, I can be so picky. Because it's not just who do I have in my town to bump into, it's who do I have in the whole world or whatever, 50 miles or 100 miles radius or however they work.
Yeah, and we got to be careful here again, right? So like fatphobic and racist stereotypes aren't like a product of like dating apps.
Right.
They're not produced by that, like they're a wider social problem and themselves. But the thought would be that dating apps, by creating certain affordances that put like very little information like to like choose partners based on, by putting that information like right at the front, exacerbate those kinds of stereotypes and kind of solidify them in place. So like we've kind of done two things now. We've like seen that like the promise of dating apps was to solve problems about like finding partners, and that kind of that wasn't ever a technological problem. That was a social problem. And insofar as there are bad features of dating apps as well, those aren't technological problems either. They're social problems which are exacerbated by the design of technological platforms.
Well, that's it's so good. So getting in deep on or deeper onto techno-chauvinism, there's these three tendencies: techno-solutionism, techno-optimism, and techno-fixation. And I think we've probably already been talking about techno-optimism versus techno-determinism. And I'm all over the map on this. It really depends on the day. Sometimes I'm like a techno-determinist. I'm like, or pessimist. And again, I bet there's probably distinctions between those two terms, but the opposite of techno-optimists, right? Like determinists and pessimists probably are different camps, but can you help me and the audience out with some terminology here between techno-optimism, chauvinism, determinism, and pessimism?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of things like floating around here, and like in a way this is like unhelpful terminology because we've got like techno-blahs, and like we need to kind of like sift out a little bit what's going on. So part of what I'm doing here is like a bit of unpacking what's going on in Broussard's work. So she says techno-chauvinism is just the belief that tech is always a solution.
Yeah.
But I think in her discussion, there are really like three different things going on. So one is this like way social problems are transformed into technological problems, which can then get technological solutions. So I've called that techno-solutionism, but it's not primarily about like a belief that tech is always great. It's about the way you set up problems and questions, transforming social problems into technological ones.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's like the belief that like tech is always the solution. It's like technological systems can do all these fancy things. Look at this like example where I've like got things in a really controlled environment and this thing is happening that is really striking. So I'm calling that techno-optimism.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this tendency to either ignore or to underplay the role of people in technological systems. So like these are the designers and operators you might be thinking about when you're like thinking about the way that we get knowledge from like videos, but also the folk who are behind machine learning systems, who code up the data, the people who are working on Amazon Mechanical Turk, the human content moderators, the people who fix the captions on like videos or produce data that's used in like automated captioning. So all of those three tendencies, techno-solutionism, techno-optimism, and techno-fixation, I think kind of putting them together gets you to techno-chauvinism, where it's like, for any problem, my techno-chauvinist will like know how to transform it into a technological system, know how to sell you, be really optimistic about the technological system, but forget about the role that people are playing, and then like sell you an app that's gonna do this thing.
Yeah.
So there's two things that are kind of intersect, well, like two other things that are intersecting here. So one is like techno-optimism versus techno-pessimism.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we can think about them as like attitudes towards whether technological systems are going to be doing good things or doing bad things on the whole. And there really is like, it feels like a pendulum that kind of goes too far one way, right? So we've got this kind of techno-utopian, very techno-optimist discourse prior to like 2018, where like technology is going to lead to this like amazing future. It's just out of reach. And that's kind of switched too far back, and people are now thinking everything's going to be terrible. We're going to get to this dystopia really quickly, and there's nothing we can do about it,
right.
Which is like an extreme kind of techno pessimism. Or I guess a techno dystopianism. There's too many work terms going on here. And then techno determinism is fitting into a different set of issues about whether the way that we use all of the things that we do and the social practices that are formed are entirely determined by the design and material reality of a technological system. So if you're so if you're thinking about like social media, sometimes you hear claims like, well, look, we all like share these really outrageous false claims on Facebook, and that's just because of the design of the platform.
Right.
Like that completely determines things. So I think it's helpful to think about the contrary of techno-determinism. So here, I think I actually talk about this in the footnote of the paper. I pulled on some work of Quill Kuckler's. So they, in their work on slightly like surprisingly on geography and the meaning of spaces, like distinguish between like a certain kind of like spatial determinism, where like the use or meaning of a space is determined by its material features, and a kind of like voluntarism, where the meaning of a space is just determined by what people are doing or like social practices. And they argue that like neither of those views is right. There's all these complicated interactions between social practices and the like physical features of space. So the way building is designed, and then like what kind of social practices, what games or like things people do in that space. So I think the attitude to take about technological systems is similarly, don't be a techno-determinist, think that what we do is just because of the way a technological system, which itself is a kind of material system, is set up. And don't think it's like we've got complete choice over how we use the technology either.
Would you call that techno-voluntarism?
So I'd call that techno-voluntarism, I think,
Okay.
in this footnote. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So instead, think that there are these complicated, like, techno-social practices, which are partly determined by material features of technology, but also partly by the social practices in which those technologies are used. And what we're trying to get to is like good techno-social practices. So there's like a bunch of things going on here. We've got techno-chauvinism, it's got these three elements. We've got techno-optimism versus techno-pessimism, and then techno-determinism versus techno-voluntarism. And I'm arguing for this kind of like, I think this is a way the default view that like there are these techno-social practices that have technological elements, also social elements.
I love it. I love the golden mean there. I wonder in the techno-social practice view, is there still room for like Heidegger's in framing, I guess? I hate to mention Heidegger, but he's so big in the space. Like, does can the human social practices be determined? Determined is the wrong word to use too. Changed and shaped in a necessary way based on a certain tool? Like maybe not totally, right? But like, can there be inherent? I guess we could just say bad things. Could there be inherent bad things to a certain technological device that would end up changing our social practices for the worse, even if it's not totally, Did you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Right. So there might be. So the idea is like.
Maybe I can use guns because that's the typical, right?
Yeah.
It's like guns don't kill people, people kill people. That's like the voluntarist one. And then the other folks are like, no, if there's a gun on the table and you get in an argument, you're going to reach for the gun. And in a sense, you can, depending on how metaphorical you get, like the gun, you become a gunman because you've taken this for it and it's kind of beckoning to you. And the middle way would be like, well, it's something in between both. But I wonder if that's a I like the golden mean, but I'm wondering if that's a stable position because it seems like we may fall one side or the other.
Right. So you might think there are certain kinds of technological systems which just have bad effects on techno-social practices. Like they tend towards, maybe we want to be careful here. We don't want to say they lead to necessarily, but they tend towards like techno-social practices with bad features. So if we frame it that way, like, cool, like I've got no problems with it. The thing that we want to be careful about is this tendency to think that it's like fully determined. So like as soon as you've got the technology like going on, then these bad social consequences are going to happen.
Tend towards. That's great. That's good terminology. That's good distinction. Instead of lead to, tend towards. You get some probability in there, and
I mean, you can just imagine like kind of wild hypothetical situations where like like I'm a pacifist. Like I'm not like pro guns, but like you can imagine a situation where there are like lots of firearms like around, but like we have these really strong social practices against like ever using them, and for that reason, like no one gets shot. That's not a realistic situation, like given the way people are and the way like human social conflict plays out. That's not plausible, but that is a possible situation. So we need to be careful and like say, this kind of technology will tend towards producing a techno-social practice with bad consequences.
Yeah, you don't want to invite the easy counterexample by making too strong of a claim.
Right.
It's like philosophy 101. That's good stuff.
Yeah, and just to like loop way back, so I think this is why it's helpful when thinking about anything in the epistemology of technology or like the ethics of AI or like the ethics of technology, to be thinking about like general questions in the philosophy of technology, because it's really tempting to like fall into this kind of like techno-determinist line where it's like the technology itself is the problem. It will lead to these kinds of problems in the future, and this is going to be a bad thing. There's a kind of like model for ethics of AI papers where it's like this kind of technology is coming over the horizon, it's going to arrive in 5 years, it will have these bad features and these good features.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, look, it's really complicated. Like, it's going to depend on like a bunch of like social practices, and you need to think about how the social practices will interact with the technology.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I'm gonna listen back on this. I need to listen back on this a lot, but that's such a good tool to have in your head when you're reading this stuff. And you're pretty brave for reading so many periodicals about deepfakes and stuff like that. Like I'm trying to become an expert in the philosophy of AI, and it's so tough reading these journalists, because so many of them are just like, do you know that this thing passed the Turing test, and that means that it's conscious?
Right.
And you're like, what?
Yeah,
Wait,
yeah.
hold on, what? But yeah, wading through and then even going to the philosophy papers, if you're able to have this kind of framework and say this isn't the necessary framework that fits everything, but saying like this is a good guide to thinking about these claims, and yes,
Right.
there is a kind of a pattern that comes out where they say it's 5 years away, and being able to see that can, instead of just writing someone off, it can be a shorthand for helping you think clearly about it and not being too drawn into the moment, but saying, hey, let's think through this more clearly.
Yeah, and I think what's going on is that like there is a bit of a weird moment where it feels like lots of people think that there's like a real need, both people hiring people for jobs, but also people like deciding what to work on next for this thing, ethics of AI, thinking about the ethics of these AI systems, which are either have arrived or are going to arrive, like, whatever. And a lot of those folk are under pressure to put out work quickly. And one thing that's happened is that like there isn't enough like distributed knowledge about like either the philosophy of technology, and these debates have been going on for years and years, like
Right.
in philosophy of technology courses, I think more in like Europe, continental Europe, than in the UK and the US, where it's like we've got this tradition of philosophy of technology where like we read Heidegger first and then think about the meaning of technology, go through that. So people aren't based on that, and they're also not like talking to science and technology studies people and like the critical work that's being done based in science and technology studies. So yeah, I'm thinking about people like let me look at Sophia Noble and like Ruha Benjamin, and like critical figures on technology that are basing their intellectual work in science and technology studies, where they're not just paying attention to the features of the technological system, but also to the kind of like wider social practices which are being perpetuated or like solidified or like changed and made more problematic by technological systems. So I think kind of either one of those feels like a more productive way of trying to do philosophy of technology, rather than this model, which is of course a bit caricatured, like no one's maybe doing justice, of thinking through like this technology is coming, let's count up its like good and bad features which it will have on our social practices, which feels to be more of like a kind of applied ethics model.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think even taking it case by case, because in defense of the folks that you just defended yourself, saying it's a bit caricatured. They may say, well, the same thing is true of the feminist philosophers. They could also come up with a pattern and say this is how it's going to harm this group of people. And it's like, if we all just stop doing that and we take it case by case, and then we take each paper case by case, then it'll be better for all of us if we're doing that kind of work instead of.
And it's not like I'm trying to be like stop doing ethics of AI or anything.
Right, totally.
I mean, there's like I end up getting a like rep for being like stop doing this thing, like scold, like stop talking about fake news or whatever. It's just like there's this better thing we can be doing, which is to not just be thinking about like a form of technology and the effects which it will have, definitely, because we can see its effects on like by just looking at the features of the technological system. Instead, think about techno-social systems
Yeah.
Think about the social practices that we have. Look at empirical literature, like interdisciplinary empirical literature on the way that social practices interact with technological systems and the good and bad features of that. And then use a wider range of critical tools, including tools from like feminist theorists and like the Black feminist tradition and like social and political philosophy more broadly. That feels like a kind of more productive project for me. So like this comes up in epistemology. So you're like there's this like little routines people sometimes go through where they're like, look, this feature of a social media platform. So like the like button on Facebook or like all these range of emoji has this bad effect. It causes people to be really emotional or have emotional reactions, and then that like undermines or like decreases the quality of testimony on social media, and that's a bad thing. And it's like, okay, cool, that's one thing you can do, but there's also so much empirical literature on the social practices that arise on social media platforms, and there's loads of interesting things to be said about those social practices, where it's not just like how are people reacting to different messages, like what are people trying to do, what are their like ways of forming their identities, what are their ways of like coming up with counter publics or like finding like-minded communities online. If you go and look at that empirical literature in internet studies, then a different range of kind of evaluative questions comes up, and you just get a more interesting kind of evaluation of what's going on the internet. Yeah, so like I should say the kind of book which I think is taking the good strategy here of like engaging with interdisciplinary scholars is Karen Frost Arnold's new book, Who Should We Be, online, which is really great at this. It's like she's gone and like dived into that literature, and the questions that she's come back with are really informed by what like internet studies folk are interested in studying on the internet.
That's awesome. Yeah. Oh man, there's so much going on. That's so good. I think my concern. So I'm still a student, and I totally agree with you. And even grabbing tools from different subfields in philosophy, even people you may disagree with or you may have a bias against, like, but if they have some good tools, maybe you can broaden your own perspective by reading them as well. Maybe that's a good thing. But then interdisciplinary is a whole nother thing, and it can be a bit overwhelming at times. I think.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel that as well?
Yeah. And I think that was part of why I was trying to say that there's lots of pressures on people in this field to like turn stuff out really quickly.
Yeah.
Because I think this kind of interdisciplinary work is really slow. Like, because you have to like understand why people are saying something in a different field, like what their questions are, what their methodologies are, and it just slows you down a lot.
Big time.
Yeah.
Like years types. I'm thinking of What We Owe the Future, McCaskill, and think what you want about the book, but I think they were saying like 10 years to write the book or 5 years or something, like multiple years. And in a space like techno-philosophy or the philosophy of technology, that's forever. Like if you try to write a book on AI and it took you 3 years to write it, AI is different now, and it is and it isn't, right? It depends. It's still the same stories going on, and GoFi versus connectionism, but still the specifics have changed so much. So I understand, and it's just for me, I'm like, this is really tough stuff. It's really tough because I understand why you'd want to pump it out, but I also get that if you want to do good work, it needs to be interdisciplinary, and if you want to do that kind of good work, it takes a very long time to understand.
Yeah, right. And maybe the solution is just like having different kinds of projects going on at the same time.
Yeah.
So like, I'm trying to think about like other fields that have this kind of structure. Yeah. So maybe think about like climate scientists. So people who build complicated physics models of like not the weather but of the climate, and like there's different projects going on there. So one is like, how are we going to build better models for doing everything? How are we going to build different models for like doing like deep geological time? And then how are we going to like forecast a little bit in the time, a little bit forwards, to see what the kinds of social and political and economic effects of climate change would be over the short term. So maybe there's a kind of like analogous, like multi-methods thing that's worth thinking about, where there's space both for like the very general kinds of philosophy of technology inquiry, where you're thinking about like, how should we understand techno-voluntarism and techno-determinism? Like, what's the right kind of like position to take on how the meaning of a technological system is determined? And then different kinds of like, the metaphor has given me more resources than I thought it was going to do, but like thinking about the way that historical problems to do with technology have like connections to current problems, and then also a kind of like reactive or like responsive kind of loss of technology is interested in like, this problem has come up, cool, what can we do about it, without thinking that like last thing is the only thing that we want to do. Similarly, like in the climate change case, like it's really important to have predictions for where the effects of climate change are going to be the worst, and like what kinds of mitigation are going to be most effective. But we can't do any of that unless we have like really effective models which can work at a bunch of different scales.
Yeah. This has been so good. I wanna wrap it up with I used to cringe when I would think of calling myself an abstract thinker because I prioritize that type of thinking, and so to call myself that would be like boastful. But then I'm realizing more and more from my audience that like so many people are practical and they don't think that abstract thinking is super cool. And so I think I can call myself that and just be descriptive now without trying to like boast, because it's just just who I am. I like to think abstract. I love that stuff. But for the sake of my audience, I want to leave them with some practical steps. And this is really hard because so much of this is analysis and just getting clear on what we mean. And so then people are like, well, what do you want me to do? And it's like, no, I want you to think. I don't want you just to go and act on what I've said. I want you to think about it too. But so in trying to tie this back up and close the loop, deepfakes may have terrible effects on our social epistemic practices, but it's a social thing, and we need to shore up our social institutions, and maybe that's where the answers will lie.
And it's boring stuff. It's like the solution to like inaccurate representations of the world isn't like particular solution for deepfakes. It's like having better media systems in general. So like there's like limited things that we can do as individuals. Like there are some ways that one can like fund like independent media which is reliable, and reliability here is both responding to like are people saying things that are true, and like both, and also what topics people are covering.
That's good. Yeah, that's a really good point. The topics as well. Sometimes those get stifled based on who's promoting or who's sponsoring.
But partly some of those problems about the media system in general, which has lots of other problems, like besides deepfakes, require like systemic solutions as well. So like better public funding for media is kind of the end point to get towards. So there's a bunch of things like people who like the epistemic apocalypse think that it's going to happen. So they say things like it's important to be aware of deepfakes and kind of know what they look like. And like, I think those are good things to have as well, right? It's like an interesting like little exercise to do, to go and look on YouTube or look on Reddit to see what actual deepfakes look like that aren't produced by like a really fancy production studio working together with a skilled impersonator. So the Tom Cruise example we talked about at the top, turns out the guy that is being videoed in that is a Tom Cruise impersonator who looks just like Tom Cruise.
He looks just like him. Yeah, he looks really much
so
like, yeah.
Once you realize that, it's like, oh, it's not that impressive. But like, so it's interesting to look at those videos and like see some of the interesting little tells. So lots of them are just very poorly animated, or the back of the screen will be pixelated at a different resolution to the face. Those are interesting things to like pay attention to. Also like knowing what some like fact checking websites are that might debunk and like do the boring old school journalism of like did this really happen or not? Having like a little store of those are all good things to have as like a consumer of the media. But the ultimate thing to be thinking about it is like, what does reliable news media look like, and how can we produce that as a collective achievement?
Do you think people should be writing their senators promoting watermark laws or anything on videos? Is that a social solution, or is that more of a tech solution? Because you're saying I want watermarks. Is that a tech thing or is that a social thing?
I mean, I'd have to think about like the way that's implemented. I think in a way we kind of have that already, right? Well, that's a bit tricky, right? So when you see a video on social media or on a news website, normally you do, or you should be paying attention to who's sharing the video and like what kind of work they might have done. So if it's just a random person you've never heard of, probably there's some reasons to not trust that this video is like out of context, not the video has been presented within its right context and with the right information about what's being represented. Whereas if it's being shared by like a really reputable like newspaper or an independent journalist who's got a good rep, that's kind of already functioning a little bit like a watermark. And that's a much more distributed system, right? You don't need like one centralized authority to kind of have the kind of stamp of approval on like who can put out videos. So I think there are some reasons to be skeptical about centralized authorities. And then we've already got something a bit like that, which is reliable journalists. We need more of them, basically.
Yeah, that's really good.
There is stuff going through the US legal system at the moment, legislation against deepfake, which I think might well like ameliorate some of the bad effects of that. Like, that's an interesting thing to look into. Like, but I'm not super convinced by watermarks or like using the blockchain or something to verify videos.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Well, Josh, this has been huge, man. Thanks for all your time. Thanks for your work. And if somebody wanted to read this paper, and you did send me a video, I'm not sending that around or anything, but is that going to be a series that people can go and buy and watch?
So it's coming out. So there's two things. So my website is Joshua Habgood-Coote. If you copy and paste it from the like video description, like that's easy to find. One of the perks of having a distinctive name. And if you click through either to papers on my website or to Phil papers, there's a like open access version of the paper. There's also various kind of like shorter versions of the paper that I've written up for various blogs in different places. And there's a kind of video essay of like 20 minutes or so that should be coming out in the next few weeks, which I'll link through my website, but will be coming out on the New Work in Philosophy Substack.
Awesome. That sounds so good. Well, I'll put all the links to that stuff in the description, and then if this comes out before that video, I will go back later and add that in. So folks, be looking in the description or follow the links all the way through. Josh, this has been really, really fun. Thanks again for all your time.
Great. Thanks, Parker. Thanks, audience, sticking around and for listening.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.